All right. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. This is really exciting for me to be able to talk to you all today. Um, in addition to being the teen librarian at the Dover Library, I'm also a self-published author, as Jim mentioned. Over the course of my lifetime, I've written about 10 novels, and I've written all sorts of genres from children's middle grade fantasy to romance and poetry to young adult books. And so it was a couple of years ago that I decided to try to get one of my young adult novels published. It was just one of those things that had been in the back of my mind for a while, and I figured it was a good time to try. Everyone else seemed to be doing it. A lot of people are self-publishing on Amazon nowadays, and I figured I'd give it a try. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about what that experience was like for me. And first, I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about myself. So let's see here. All right, so from a very young age, I was kind of obsessed with books. They were my calling, they were my whole world. I was a huge Harry Potter fan, and it was actually after the final Harry Potter book was released that I decided to write my very first novel. What I did was I created my own take on the wizarding world. I had brand new characters, brand new setting, and a totally new plot. But it was kind of like my homage to Harry Potter in a way. So that was really what got me started writing, and I will always have J.K. Rowling to thank for that. And then after I graduated from college at Brandeis University, I started an internship at the Cultural Center of Cape Cod in South Yarmouth. That middle picture you see there is of me standing next to Lauren Wolk. Lauren is now a Newbery Honor Award recipient and a best-selling author. She's doing amazing things these days. And it was such a treasure to be able to work alongside her for 4 years. Usually about once a week, I would go to the Cultural Center and intern with her. And she served as my mentor. It was really wonderful. What we did together was we started a small poetry press, and we would have like poetry competitions where all the local poets could submit books of poetry. And then once a year, we would choose one book to have published. And we had never published anything ourselves before. It was really our first time figuring out how to do this. So we learned a lot about what it is like to be a publisher, what it's like to be an editor, and really what the strengths are of being a good writer. And so I really learned a lot from Lauren. It was at the time that I started interning with her that she was just finishing Wolf Hollow, her very first book. And looks like someone's waiting, Jim. You want to let them in? Great. So she was just finishing Wolf Hollow, and she was sending it out to different agents trying to get a contract. And I got to watch her journey from getting that contract to getting her first book published, getting all of the positive reviews that came in, her awards, publishing her second book. I kind of was able to watch her go through that experience, and it was so inspiring to me. It just motivated me even more to want to have that experience for myself someday. But first, I decided to start a freelance editing business. I had been editing basically for free for 4 years as an intern, so I figured why not get a little money out of it. So I started my own freelance editing business, which I called Fine-Tuned Editing. That's my logo in the corner there. And that was another thing that really encouraged me to get into publishing. I got to help all of these writers who had the same dream that I did of wanting to be published someday. And I got to share that passion with them and help them get, just a little bit closer to reaching their goal. And it was during that time that I decided, hey, all these other people are doing this, why not me? I had submitted a lot of my younger novels to different literary agents and publishers since I was about 13. I received my fair number of rejection letters, which were never fun, and some really nice comments, which I think they knew how young I was at the time. So they're like, keep writing, little girl. But it was a really good learning process for me. And sometimes I would send out stuff to agents and never hear anything back at all. That happens a lot too in the traditional publishing industry. So I finally decided, hey, well, I'm going to try to self-publish it. I have all these tools that I've learned from the Cultural Center, and I think I can do it. So that's when I decided to take on self-publishing. So My very first book that I published is called Assignment. And Assignment came out on December 13th of 2018. In case any of you haven't read it, which I'm sure some of you haven't, it tells the story of an 18-year-old graduate named Phoebe, and she is assigned by the government to live a life of solitude and hard work. So in Phoebe's island city of Serena, the population is divided into two different groups. One group is the workers who keep the economy going, and the other group is the caretakers who keep the population growing. So because of Phoebe's assignment, she is forbidden from marrying, from seeing her family more than twice a year, and from ever having children. So the novel really deals with her struggle dealing with her assignment, and just sort of how she learns to come into her own and become a more self-sufficient member of society. Her whole childhood, she relied on her parents and her family, and this was her first time being out on her own in the world and having to get by. So for me, it was a really important book to write because it dealt with all of the questions that I was grappling with at the time. I started writing it when I was in my last year of college, and I didn't know what my next step was going to be, where I was going to work. I was living on the Cape at the time, but going to college in Waltham, so I didn't know if I should move back to the Cape after graduation or stay somewhere in the Boston area where there are definitely more career opportunities in the literary field. So I was just dealing with all of those questions of work versus family and love, and how can you choose one over the other? Is it ever possible to truly have both? So I think for me, that was kind of the number one question that I wanted to address in Assignment, which is it possible to ever have a truly balanced life where work and family can both be your priorities equally, and you don't have to necessarily choose one over the other? And then the other question that I really hope Assignment addresses is, at what point do we stand up and start to fight for what we want? There are a lot of dangers involved for Phoebe if she is to try to fight back against the government and stand up for what she believes in. So it's kind of that question of, how long do we let the status quo continue, and when do we decide enough is enough and I'm going to do something about it? And then what kind of risks might come into play when you do decide to do that? So the pictures that you see on the screen are taken on my first day when my books arrived from Amazon. It was a very memorable day, opening that Amazon box up and seeing the beautiful book covers. I had a lot of fun having a little photo shoot that day. And so you can see me with my dog reading there in my parents' dining room. That's definitely one day I'll never forget. And on the left there is the cover that I designed. Both of those photos are actually of me. I get a lot of people asking who's the person in the cover. So they're both of me. One is supposed to be sort of the more professional side, and then the other one is the more like family, romance, kind of nurturing side. So that's what those images represent. One thing I do want to mention is there was something that occurred when I first published Assignment. And it was that I received so much support from family and friends. And that meant the world to me, because when you're a first-time writer, it's really difficult to make yourself known in the literary world. And you have to rely on all the people that you know and the people that you care about to help you get off the ground. And so I had family members that I hadn't talked to in years, friends of friends, fellow church members, long lost classmates from high school that I thought had forgotten I even existed. They all kind of came out of the woodwork on social media and were helping to share my book with their friends and family and help to promote it, or even just to tell me how great it was that I had published a book. And so that was really touching, and it was kind of a boost for me as I set out to continue with this process. And I think that's one of the biggest lessons I learned as well from self-publishing, is do not underestimate the power of word of mouth. We all put so much emphasis nowadays on technology, social media, having a website, a blog, things like that. But the power of word of mouth is still very, very strong. And if you can tell one person about your book and they go on to tell one other person, it's amazing how quickly the news can travel. So that was really, really exciting for me. I thought I would take a quick moment just to read part of the first page or so of assignment, just so you can get a feel for what it's about. So let me just turn to page 1 here. So the way that assignment begins is Phoebe is waking up on the morning of her assignment ceremony, where she's going to be assigned to one of those 2 groups. And this is sort of her last day of her childhood. She's getting ready to figure out where she'll be moving forward from here. And all along in her childhood, she had to keep a diary every day. It was sort of one of the ways that society kind of studied her and determined where she would be a better fit. And she just had her last diary entry, so it's kind of her goodbye in a way. So this is the start of chapter 1. Dear Diary, I am told this is the last time I will ever have to write to you. Yesterday was my last day of career school. After today, I will no longer be an object of study for the psychologist at Freiburg. I will be just another 18-year-old graduate, waiting in line for my turn at the assignment ceremony, waiting to see if my calling belongs with the self-reliant thinkers in 1 or the loving homemakers in 2. I bet you can guess what last night's dreams were about, but just like every other night, I'll tell them to you anyway. A crowd of strangers, a rusty platform, a dangling chandelier over my head. Noah watches me from the audience, his fingers laced together instead of entwined with my own. Harmony and melody already stand among a circle of 2s, rejoicing that their life as sisters has been allowed to continue. I raise my hand to the level of my eyes, peering through bright lights. There she is, Violet, clutching Mom's wrist and whispering to herself. Could she be praying? It isn't like Violet to believe in that which she cannot see. I take 2 steps closer to the edge of the platform, and the light goes out. Through the darkness, I glance from left to right, from the comfort and safety of the village to the isolation of the fray. I can't make out the bodies, but I know what it means when an invisible hand to my right holds up a red sparkler to the sky. My sister, a 2. Harmony and melody and dawn, all 2s. Noah, an only child, one of the rarest breeds in Serenia, fated for life as a 2. I am a 1. I know that dreams are not reality, diary, but can they ever be omnipotent? I have always looked to them for knowledge, but today I can only hope that they are made from fear. The fondest of goodbyes, Phoebe Ray. So that's just the start of assignment, just a little taste so you can see what it's like. And one thing that I forgot to mention earlier is that when I decided to make assignment and to publish it, I was deciding to publish a trilogy because I had planned on having 3 books in a series. And so publishing that first book was also sort of an agreement to myself that I would then publish 2 more. So it's a good thing that the first one went well and I figured out what to do because once I was doing the second one, I had learned so many things from the first time around. It was a much easier process. So my second book is called Containment, and it just came out in January of this year. It came out about a month before COVID-19 started to be like a really big thing in the US. And it's kind of funny because at that time, all of these reporters were on television talking about how we need to contain the virus and we need to contain ourselves in our homes to prevent the spread. It was just sort of an irony that I had this book called Containment and everyone was using that buzzword contain all the time. But I'm not a psychic by any means, and containment has nothing to do with a pandemic or COVID-19. It really continues Phoebe's story of her efforts to contain or to fight back against the government and the government's attempts to contain the rebels like Phoebe and her friends. It's really, I think, a little bit more political than the first book because it deals a lot with people versus the government and that idea. There is a lot of tension, I think, and struggle in the second book, and you definitely get a sense that there's a lot at stake. And so for me, Containment was so much fun to write because it just felt like every single page had something really important going on. And it's probably my favorite book that I've ever written at this point. So I was really excited to release it. I hope that any of you who have read it have enjoyed it, or if you're still reading it, I hope you're enjoying it so far. And the pictures that you see here, one of them is the full book cover from front to back. And then the one on the right is a poster that was made of my very first author talk, which I did at Sudbury Library. They actually created this really nice flyer, and I just thought it was so well done that I thought I'd share it with you. I did want to mention that as a young writer, I did not have the money to pay for all of the people that are usually involved in the publishing process. So typically you have a separate cover designer, a separate series of editors, proofreaders, formatters, marketing consultants, sales managers. There's so many people that are usually involved. And for me, being an early first-time writer, I just could not afford to hire all of those people to do freelance work for me. And so I had to teach myself how to do all of those things and learn all of those skills. And so that is a cover that I designed myself. I always say to people who are interested in self-publishing, if you're going to spend money on anything, spend it on a good cover, because the cover is really what catches people's eye when they're trying to find a good book to read. For me, I was fortunate enough to find a really great image that was copyright free that I could use for the cover. But I think spending a lot of time and effort on a really good cover is one of the major lessons that I've learned as well. So I will break for a moment to see if anyone has any questions, and then I will continue to talk about the publishing process. I've got some tips and tricks that I've learned, which I'll share with you in a moment. So does anyone have any questions for the time being about anything I've talked about or anything about the books? We'll get into all the self-publishing stuff in just a minute.
And if you do have a question, feel free to unmute yourself and just ask away.
So when you wrote your book, who was the first person that you had give their opinion and, you know, go to get feedback, and did you make changes after that?
That's a great question. I think one of the first people was my sister. I know she read it like the very first draft many, many years ago. I also had a really close friend from elementary school, and she used to read all my books growing up, from the really bad ones when I was really young to the newer ones. And so I had her read it, and she loved it. She really did. But she had a lot of important feedback for me. One of the things she mentioned was kind of a surprise to me. I had created these three main characters that I saw in my mind. So it was Phoebe, and then kind of her two potential love interests, Noah and Sky. And she came back to me after reading it and said, "I hate Noah. I cannot stand him." And to me, that was a big surprise because I had intended both of them to sort of be equally likable. And so after that happened, I had to do a lot of revisions to try to make him a little bit of a more sympathetic character. But then that definitely impacted how I went about writing him going forward. So the next two books, I gave him a lot more like character development. I made him go through a lot more struggles than I initially planned on because I really wanted him to be a redeeming character by the end. So I would say, yeah, those are the first people that I had read it. Yeah, I think those were the first two, I'm pretty sure. So, yeah.
Thanks.
Thanks for the question. Amanda?
Just wondering, how did you plot out your book?
That's a great question. So there are some writers who can just sort of write as they go and they come up with ideas as the ideas flow. And I am not one of those people. I'm a very organized, need to have everything in place before I even start. So what happens is when I get an idea, I sit down with a pen and paper and I just jot down everything I can think of. And usually I spend like about 2 hours going through what happens next, what happens after that, what happens after that. And I end up with a pretty detailed outline of the way I want things to go. So for me, it's when the idea hits, I have to find a pen and paper, and then I just start jotting down what comes to me. That doesn't mean that things don't change as I write it. Oftentimes there are little things that happen that I hadn't anticipated, or some things I didn't see coming. But for the most part, I like to have it all planned out. And usually that's just taking the time to write it down when that inspiration hits.
How long did it take to write the first draft?
So usually it takes me about a year to write a book. If I was able to write every day, it would take way less time. But between working and all of my other responsibilities, I just don't have the time to devote every single day to writing. So I usually write for about 2 hours a week. 2 hours a week for about a year is kind of how long it takes. And then after that, usually 6 months or so of editing and revisions. So that's kind of the timeline that I'm usually used to. But if you have, like, during this pandemic, being working from home a lot more, because I don't have to have commuting time and things like that, I've had more time to write, which has been really great. And so I can probably get things a lot faster now. But yeah, usually around a year.
So I have a question for you, Angie.
Yeah.
When you're writing a trilogy like that, how often do you have to go back to the first book, or this, now that you're writing the third book, to the second book and go, wait, what did I say there? How, like, so that you make sure that it's all flows and
Yeah, all the time. I try to keep very detailed notes beside me so that I don't have to, like, flip back through and find a particular part in a particular chapter. But that's another great thing about being an editor, is I'm able to read through the book when it's finished and pick up on things. So when I was editing my very first book, Assignment, I realized that I had changed, like, the gender of her cat 5 different times. So the cat was a boy, then it was a girl, then it was a boy again, and a girl again. And so, like, those little things I even have to look back at now when I'm editing book 3 and make sure that I stayed consistent. Having an outline or a series of notes next to me has definitely helped a lot. But I always try to kind of reread the previous book before I start to edit the next book. That way I can have some things in the back of my mind that I want to make sure to that I kept consistent. I think that's one of the biggest challenges about writing a series. Like, that's one of the things I admired so much about J.K. Rowling, is she had 7 books, and to try to keep all of those details straight must have been really difficult. When I first wrote my book when I was really young, after I read the last Harry Potter book, I was going to write 7 books. I was going to do a 7-book series. And then I quit after 3. I was like, no, I can't do this. So I'm sure it would be possible to keep all those details together, but it would not be easy. So I definitely admire her for that. Because
you've done, like, the trilogy, I'm writing a children's book, a picture book, and I do want to do a series. I've got obviously the thought of everything in my head. Would you write down your plan of your next book before the first one's published, or so you can start it off, or would you concentrate on your first one first?
That's a great question. I usually concentrate on the first one, get that finished, and then start planning the next one. But what I didn't want to do is I didn't want to publish the first book until I had all 3 written. And so I waited until I wrote the entire series before publishing, because I didn't want to end up going totally in the wrong direction and then leaving people hanging. So I think that's an important thing.
Would you advise it to go that way then? Would you advise to write all the books first and then publish it as a series?
I think so. It kind of depends how long the series is going to be. If it's a small children's book and you're going to write 40 books, I don't think you have to write all of them. But if it's a short series, then yeah, I would definitely advise that, especially if you want that continuity throughout.
Yeah.
Any other questions at the moment? Liz.
So I'm wondering if I think you alluded to this a little bit before, but did you ever have a character just you found it was going in a different direction than you wanted, and did you reel it back, or did you say, okay, well, so maybe that's the way this should go instead of what I originally thought when I outlined?
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely. Well, I mentioned what happened with Noah, but another character that really happened with was Felicia. When I had first started writing her character, I had thought she would be a pretty minor character, and I hadn't really developed her much because I figured she'd sort of be in and out. And then I just got so intrigued by her as I was writing her into different scenes, and I kind of got carried away with her to the point where she's a pretty significant figure in the second and particularly in the third book. And so I think that definitely happens is you'll write a character and then you'll sort of fall in love with them and you'll make them a more prominent person than they originally might have been. So that happened.
Angie, do you have a favorite type of character that you like to write? Like, I know actors a lot of times talk about they really love playing the villain because it gets them out of their comfort zone and stuff. Did you have a type of character that you kind of like to write?
Yeah, I really love to write the character of Sky. He was kind of like the playful, flirtatious, typical boy. And he always had a lot of funny little quips that he said here and there. I loved writing him. I really enjoyed writing the villains because I found like just it was very different from the kind of personality that I feel like I have. And so being able to explore a different side was really nice. I'm actually working on a separate book that's not part of the series right now. And what I decided to do was write a character that has sort of a very kind of difficult personality, and she's not necessarily the most likable character in the beginning, and to try to find a way to redeem her by the end of the book. And that was really fun for me because I got to just investigate what this character, like what all of their motives were, and that was really enjoyable too. So I think sometimes it's the characters that are the least like us or the most like us that we like to write about. All right, so I think I'll continue the presentation now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about self-publishing. Let's see here. I think I shared the wrong screen. Hang on one second. Here is my PowerPoint. There we go. Okay. All right. So this is really for the aspiring writers out there, or anyone who's ever thought about what it would be like to write and publish a book. I hope that you learned something from this. This is all the stuff that I really learned as I was self-publishing through Amazon. So I think before you can think about self-publishing a novel, you have to have a novel. You have to have something written. And it's really important as you're writing, as you're editing, and as you're marketing your book to ask yourself what kind of book it is. I know in society we don't always want to put labels on things, but when it comes to publishing a book, it's really important to have a label so that when you're promoting it to people, you can tell them this is fantasy, this is dystopian, this is romance. So kind of discovering what kind of book you want to write and then making sure that you're following through with that throughout the book is really important. There are so many fun different kinds of books that you can write, whether it's sci-fi, horror, contemporary, and it doesn't have to be just one either. You can pick and choose. You can write a fantasy, romance, horror book. What I liked was I combined dystopian and romance for mine. That was really the two categories that I felt like mine settled on the most. But I think just really honing in on what it is you want to write about and making sure you follow through with that is kind of the first step. And then another thing you'll want to think about as you're writing and editing is what makes a great story. I think that a lot of the great books out there tend to share several things in common. They tend to have strong, well-developed, unique, and interesting characters, a solid, intriguing plot that keeps the readers guessing and invested in the outcome, They all have to have some sort of conflict, whether it's internal or external or both. Oftentimes it is both. But that conflict has to add to the tension and excitement in the book. You want to think about the prose. So well-written language, not just writing the first thing that pops into your head, but really fine-tuning that. Forgive me for the pun from my editing business. Your language, also your dialogue and your description, focusing on how you want to be perceived, like what kind of writing style you want to have for that. Also the voices of your characters. I know one of the biggest pitfalls that beginner writers fall into is they tend to make a lot of their characters talk the same. And so especially if you're writing a book with multiple points of view, it's really important to kind of differentiate those voices. In Containment, I write from the perspective of 3 different characters. So it bounces back and forth between Phoebe and Noah and Sky. And so I tried to create little nuances in their dialogue and in their thoughts so that they wouldn't sound exactly the same as the other characters. And then the other thing is pacing. And so whatever genre you're writing, you want to focus a lot on pacing. And you want to make it suit your genre and your subject matter. So if you're writing a really scary scene in a book, focus on drawing it out a little bit and kind of making the reader wait, adding that suspense. Other kinds of things, if you're giving backstory in a book, you don't want to have backstory last for 10 pages. You want to kind of pace it a little quicker. So pacing is a really important thing to focus on. And like I said, suspense is also really important. No matter what genre you're writing, having something that keeps people engaged and interested. And finally, I think that all great books have some sort of message. So you want to ask yourself, like, why should other people read my story? What are they going to take away from it? How will the experience of reading change a person? Those are all things that you can think about as you're writing and then also as you're editing and going back and looking at what you've written so far. So I was doing a little research for this and I just found some of these facts really interesting. I definitely suffered from a little bit of self-doubt when I was going into publishing, and these facts helped me feel so much more confident and relieved. All these major writers have experienced rejection, and a lot of them have experienced disappointments for years. And it's just nice to think about where they started out and where they are now. It makes you think that it's possible for other people like us. So Harry Potter was rejected 12 times before it was published. The Diary of Anne Frank was rejected 15 times. Lord of the Flies was rejected 20 times. A Wrinkle in Time was rejected 26 times. Carrie by Stephen King was rejected 30 times. Gone with the Wind 38 times. Gertrude Stein submitted poems for 22 years before one of them was ever published. And then Beatrix Potter had to publish The Tale of Peter Rabbit herself. So she was a self-publisher. I just find that so fascinating because now these are some of the iconic books that people refer to as being very significant. And so to think about all of those publishers who rejected them and how they must have been kicking themselves afterward, it helps that feeling of, oh, why did I get rejected again? Here's another rejection letter. So I found that very encouraging. I think it gives a little bit of hope for all the new aspiring writers out there. All right. So one of the things when you're considering whether you want to go traditional publishing or self-publishing is to kind of weigh the pros and cons of each. I love creating pros and cons lists, and so I kind of created a short one here. One of the pros of self-publishing is that you will get published. That's probably the biggest benefit of self-publishing, is you don't have to wait on an agent to give you the okay or a publisher to buy and give you a contract for your book. You get to go ahead and make it happen. So for all those people who like to make their dreams come true, it's sort of a win-win. But the other thing is you are in complete control. In the traditional publishing world, they have a lot of control over everything from how much your book is going to cost, to what the cover will look like, how it's going to be marketed, where it's going to be distributed, even things like the release date, when the book is going to come out. Those are all things that if you choose to self-publish, you get to decide. And for me, that was something that I really enjoyed is having that control and being able to make those decisions for myself. But on the flip side, if you are interested in self-publishing, the con is you are the only person in control. And so the success or failure of your book is going to depend on you. So it can be a lot of responsibility. It's certainly a weight on the shoulders. But if it's something that you don't mind taking initiative and really being in charge of your book, it can be a really beneficial experience. And what's nice is all of those skills that maybe you're not familiar with, you can find other people, other freelancers out there who are, and hire them to help you. And so while you are in control, you can also give a little bit of control to some other people, to a cover designer or to someone who might market your book for you or create a social media page for you, things like that. So those are just some of the things that you kind of want to weigh as you're deciding, do I want to try self-publishing? And obviously for me, the pros outweighed the cons. All right, so this is kind of the nitty gritty here. These are what I call the 8 easy steps to self-publishing. How easy they are kind of depends on your definition of easy. I definitely find it much easier after I've done it a few times. The first thing that you want to think about is what kind of format you want to publish your book in. That can be a hardcover, a paperback, an ebook, an audiobook, all of the above. You want to think about those things because those will ultimately determine your platform. Amazon, where I publish my books, does not currently publish hardcover books. And so I knew going into it, I had to publish in paperback. If hardcover is something that you're set on, maybe Amazon isn't the right platform for you. So those are the kinds of things you want to be thinking about in the beginning. Once you do decide on your format and your platform, you're going to want to purchase an ISBN. ISBNs are sort of the main identifiers that retailers, libraries, and book buyers will use whenever they order, catalog, and sell your book. So it really plays a pivotal role in getting your book into stores and onto shelves. You do need a different ISBN for each edition or format of your book. So a different ISBN for a hardcover versus an ebook versus an audiobook. So they can get a little expensive. The typical ISBN runs for about $125, and you can get them online at Bowker, which is Bowker. Bowker also offers group discount rates where you can buy a group of 10 ISBNs for about $300. And so that's the route I decided to take because it was a pretty significant discount on 10. Another note is if you do choose to go through Amazon, they do offer a free version of an ISBN, which they call an ASIN, but that restricts you to only selling on Amazon. So if you're hoping to get your book into a bookstore or like a local coffee shop, that ASIN is not going to transfer over there. So I really do recommend purchasing the ISBNs and making that, taking that step because I think it's really beneficial and it's going to help you a lot in the long run. The other thing that you'll need to get is a Library of Congress PCN, which is a pre-assigned control number. And that's just another identifier which will make it a lot easier for people to find and access your book. And the great thing about the PCN is it is completely free. All you have to do is go to the Library of Congress's website and fill out a form. Then once your book is published, you do have to send them a copy of your book. But other than that, it's free, and it is something that I recommend all self-publishers do because it'll just help you a lot with people being able to access your book in the long run. Copyright is kind of a sticky subject. People say that your book is copyrighted the moment you put pen to paper, but for me, I like to be 100% certain that no one's going to steal my work. And so I always make an effort to get it copyrighted with the US Electronic Copyright Office. It doesn't cost that much, and the way I see it, you're going to save a lot more money doing it that way than having to pay for a lawyer down the road. So I always say copyright, copyright, copyright. It's just the safer way to go about doing things. And the last thing you'll need to purchase is a barcode. Barcodes are required for any physical copy of your book, so paperback or hardcover or a CD format. That's what the retailers are going to use to scan your novel. And Bowker gives a lot of package deals so that you can buy ISBNs with barcodes for a sort of a discounted price. So they're a really great resource to go to for all of those little things. And then, of course, designing your cover. I know as a society, we're told not to judge a book by its cover, but let's be honest, we all do. Whenever you're browsing for a new book, the cover is the first thing you see. And if it catches your eye, you're more likely to pick it up and leaf through the pages. And so, like I said before, definitely put that time and effort into designing a killer cover. If you don't have the money, like me, and you want to design your own cover, I highly recommend using Canva, C-A-N-V-A. Canva is so fantastic, and I was able to design some really nice covers at zero cost to me. There's so much that you can do with Canva, and I think it's just a great design website, especially for people who need to be able to make a really great product without spending money. So I definitely recommend that. And of course, I put down the bottom here, order a proof copy, because if you just press publish and don't order a proof copy first, there's a good chance that there's going to be some errors in your book. Think about how many times like you'll write an essay for school and then you'll print it out thinking it's perfect, and you'll have that physical copy in your hand and you'll read through and, oh no, there's a mistake. There's just something about the physical paper versus the screen where we're able to pick up on things maybe you couldn't pick up on your computer. So I always say, order that proof copy first, make sure your cover looks great, make sure everything is as you like it. It's really not much money, and you're gonna be thanking yourself later. All right, so this is, I think, every author's least favorite part of self-publishing. It's marketing. I call it every author's Achilles heel. It's definitely my least favorite part, but it is also one of the most important parts. I think as authors, we hate to self-promote and to publicize our books and tell people about them because it feels like we're bragging, and that's kind of an uncomfortable feeling. The last thing you want to do is post a nice post on Facebook about your book and then lose a bunch of friends because they all think you're being too self-promoting. So it's not fun, but it also can be fun in certain ways if you get kind of creative. The most important thing is, if you're a self-published author, if you don't market your book, nobody else will. And so making sure that you really do as much as you can to promote your book and get it out there, it's going to pay off in the long run. So there are a lot of things that you can do to market your book. Creating a website is one of them. I know a lot of authors do blogs and websites for themselves. They find that to be helpful. Social media, finding 1 or 2 or 3 social media platforms that you can really focus on and pour your love and attention into. I definitely recommend Facebook, Twitter, maybe Instagram. I don't think TikTok is going to be too important for authors, but you never know. And then finding niche groups. And so what that means is going into Facebook groups and finding a group of readers who are all reading the subject matter that you are writing. That's what I did, is I joined a bunch of like young adult author Facebook groups, and then you can kind of put in a little note about your book and hopefully get some additional readers that way. The same goes for Goodreads. There are a lot of great author groups on Goodreads, as well as places on Goodreads where you can ask for reviewers, and that is something that is going to come in handy down the road. You can start an e-newsletter and have all your friends and family sign up to get those occasional updates that you send out. Reach out to your local bookstores and friends and family and just see if the bookstores will put your book on the shelf and sell it. See if your local libraries will get a copy for the library and maybe have you come in and do an author talk someday. And then friends and family, word of mouth, like I said, very important. Having those friends and family support you along your journey is going to be very important. And the last item I didn't mention, but is listed there, is a book trailer. If you enjoy creating videos and getting a little creative, making a book trailer can be a really fun and easy way to market your book. Book trailer is very similar to a film trailer. It's just a very simple short video that kind of showcases what your book is about. And so I have included here the book trailer to my second novel, and hopefully this will work. It's very, very short, but this is the little trailer that I created to give you an idea. So that's the book trailer. They're really fun to make, and this was all made totally for free, which is great. You can find a lot of great websites online where you can use a copyright-free video. Some of them you have to give attributions, you have to kind of recognize the person who created it, but all of the ones that I chose, they said copyright-free, don't need to attribute anything, just go ahead and use it, which is really great because there's some really great quality videos in there. And so I highly recommend doing book trailers. I think YouTube is such a big deal right now, and everyone's on YouTube, so being able to pop your book trailer up there, it's just a really great way of getting the word out about your book. All right, and then the most exciting part is always release day. Sometimes you think once the release day happens, all your work is done, and that's not necessarily true. But a couple things you want to think about is definitely celebrate with a social media announcement. When your book comes out, you want to post on Facebook and on Twitter and shout it from the rooftops if you can. The more that you can do to kind of celebrate on that day, the better your book sales will be for sure. Also ask people for reviews. Reviews are one of the major ways that you can sell books because people always look at reviews when they're deciding whether or not to buy a product. So the more positive reviews you can get, the better. I have harassed a fair number of friends and family for reviews, and quite a few of them came through for me, which was really helpful. And then also asking different like library journals and going on Goodreads, searching for reviewers that way. Doing a Google search of book reviewers in your genre. It's amazing the number of people who are willing to give you a free review, and it's such a helpful part of the process. Reach out to local newspapers and news stations and see if they'll do a short story on you. And then, like I said, avoid that trap of self-doubt. It's so easy to get disappointed if your book doesn't take off right away, if the sales aren't as huge as you thought they would be. But there's always more you can do. There's always more work you can put into promoting it. So just that first day, that doesn't guarantee that your book's going to be a total flop or not. So keep going, keep persevering, keep marketing, because the marketing doesn't end when you stop writing or publishing. You want to keep that going as much as possible. And keep writing. That's a really important part, is whenever I publish a book, I kind of put that away for a while and start writing something different. That's a great distraction that will keep you from obsessing over your book sale reports and your reviews. Just focusing your attention on another book and writing that at the time. It can be a really great way to sort of avoid those plaguing self-doubt and thoughts that every author, I think, has when they publish their first book. All right, so I have just one more slide here. These are the takeaways that I hope you will take away from our presentation today. Believe that your story is worth telling. I think everyone who has a story in their heart, who wants to put it on paper, it's worth doing it. And I guarantee that if you put it out there, there's at least one person who will benefit from reading it. Know that it's going to be a lot of work, but be willing to do the work. don't be afraid to ask for help, particularly, like I said, friends and family. They are going to be your support system in this. And don't be afraid to boast. You don't want to get too carried away where every single day you're saying, hey, look at me, I'm so awesome, here's my book. But definitely feel free to boast and let people know, because I had such a hard time doing that in the beginning and nobody knew about the book. But the more I started to tell people about it, the more things became possible. And finally, remember, you might not get back what you put into it, and that's okay. I sell books on Amazon and they sell for $15. What I get back out of that is usually about $4. With ebooks, it's even less. And so knowing that it's not going to be, an instant, huge sum of money in your purse, that it's going to take a little while to get the ball rolling. All of those things are okay. It's all about the journey. It's not about immediately getting to where we want to be. And I think this is a really nice quote from J.K. Rowling. All a writer needs is talent and ink, or in this day and age, maybe a keyboard. So I really truly believe if you're interested in writing a book and self-publishing, it's worth giving it a try. And hopefully this presentation has kind of inspired you to do the same thing. So that's what I have to share with you today. And I think we have a little bit of time for questions. Jim, I'll turn it over to you.
That's been great. We do have one question from Nicola, who would like to know if she can get a copy of the PowerPoint.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. If you sign up on Eventbrite, we'll have your email address, so I can just email it to you afterward.
Excellent. Great.
Yep. Amanda.
Could I also get a copy of it emailed to me?
Of course. Yeah, absolutely.
Also, I was wondering, did you learn anything new about your own writing from publishing it?
Yeah, I think so. There's something really refreshing about hearing other people's feedback, and I always avoid it because it terrifies me. But then the more you open your ears and start to listen to what people have to say, I think it really does influence how you continue to write moving forward. I learned a lot about my characters and what people perceived of them versus maybe what I had been trying to get across. I learned a lot about people enjoying particular parts of my writing, like the dialogue, for instance, and also parts that maybe I needed to work a little harder on. And so I also learned something really interesting to me, which is a lot of people hate cliffhangers. I love cliffhangers, and I like to end every single one of my chapters with a cliffhanger, and my books with an even bigger cliffhanger. And it drove a lot of my family and friends crazy. And so I've had a few reviewers who kind of subtracted from my overall score because they hated it so much that I left them hanging. So maybe that's something that I think I'll try not to do as much as I continue with my writing career. So yeah, I think there's definitely a lot that you can learn from the feedback of other people. It's really valuable, and as much as we hate to receive it, it's important to receive it.
Any other questions? Liz, yes.
When is book 3 going to come out?
So I'm about a third of the way through editing it right now. I'm also, at the same time as I'm doing that, I am creating an audiobook version of Assignment, the first book. And I'm also writing a totally different book. So I'm kind of juggling a little too many things right now. But the third book is coming out most likely January of next year. So January of 2021. I have to give it a little bit of time, like a 6-month period after I finish editing, so I can send it out for reviews and things like that. Otherwise, I would get it out to you guys much sooner. But I've learned that that's a good strategy, is to give it time to kind of make people want it more.
Would you get reviews then before you publish it?
Yes. What I've learned since I started getting my next one ready for publishing is so many review journals require you to send it at least 3 months before publication. And
Right.
So keeping that in mind, when I decided to publish Assignment, the first one, I did it all within a month. And I didn't have any time to send it to reviewers because they wouldn't accept it. So you definitely want to send it out well in advance of the publication date. And then also when you contact people to do author talks, a lot of the libraries I reached out to said, well, we wanted you to come before your book release and not afterward. So a lot of people like that anticipation factor.
Yeah. No worries.
Any other questions? No? All right. Well, Angie, thank you so much. This has been super informative. It was great. We're all super proud of you and glad that you could do this with you.
Thank you so much. Oh, it was so great. I'm really glad I had a chance to do this today. So thank you.
Thank you, Angie. That was great.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so much
you.
for coming.
Very enjoyable.
Great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well done. All right. Well, thank you everybody for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.